My life, before all this, was a monument to the mundane. I'm Leo, a medical equipment salesman. My days were a blur of sterile hospital corridors, forced smiles for procurement managers, and endless miles on lonely highways connecting one forgettable town to the next. My reality was measured in sales quotas and fuel receipts. I was 38, recently divorced, and living in an apartment that still felt like a temporary holding cell. My ex-wife, Clara, had called my life a flat line. She wasn't wrong. I clung to my routine, to the predictable rhythm of the road, because it was the only thing I felt I could control. The supernatural was the stuff of late-night movies, a fiction for people with too much time on their hands. I believed in what I could see, touch, and invoice. It was a Tuesday night in late autumn, the kind of night where the rain isn't just falling, it's trying to erase the world. The wipers on my sedan fought a losing battle against the deluge, their rhythmic squeak a hypnotic counterpoint to the drone of the engine. I was on a desolate stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, hours from home, after a client had canceled at the last minute. The radio was spitting static. My phone had no signal, and the loneliness was a palpable weight in the passenger seat beside me. That's when I saw him, a silhouette against the gray curtain of rain, standing by the side of the road. A hitchhiker. Every rational instinct screamed at me to keep driving. The news is full of stories that start this way, and they never end well. But as I got closer, I saw he was an old man, impossibly thin, hunched against the wind. His clothes looked dark and heavy with rain. He wasn't thumbing for a ride, just standing there, as if waiting for a bus that would never come. A pang of something, pity maybe, or just a deep resonating loneliness, made my foot ease onto the brake. What kind of person leaves an old man out in a storm like this? I told myself I was still a good person, despite what Clara thought. I pulled over, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt. He opened the passenger door before I could even unlock it, a feat that pricked the back of my neck with a faint, irrational unease. He slid in, bringing a chill with him that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a deep, cellular cold, the kind you feel in a morgue. He smelled of damp earth, wet wool, and something else, something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. "Nasty night," I said, trying to break the heavy silence. He didn't look at me. He just stared ahead, his profile skeletal in the intermittent glow of the dashboard lights. He was old, far older than I first thought. His skin was like wrinkled parchment pulled tight over his bones, and his eyes were pale, watery things that seemed to reflect no light. He just nodded, a slow, creaking movement of his head. "Where you headed?" I asked. He raised a single trembling finger and pointed down the road. "Just further on." His voice was a dry rasp, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the engine, the wipers, and a faint, wet clicking sound that I realized was coming from his throat, a kind of pre-cough that never materialized. I felt an intense urge for him to just get out of my car. The initial pity had evaporated, replaced by a thick, cloying dread. I was acutely aware of his stillness, his unnerving presence. I glanced at the door lock. It was down. Good. To distract myself, I fumbled with the radio dial, trying to find a station, any human voice to cut through the tension. I turned my head away from him for no more than 3 seconds, my eyes on the glowing console. I found nothing but static. "Damn it," I muttered, turning back to the road, and he was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. The passenger seat was empty, but that wasn't possible. The door was still locked. I reached over, my hand shaking, and touched the handle. Locked tight. I looked at the seatbelt. It was still buckled, pulled taut across the empty space where he had been sitting. A perfect, impossible indentation remained on the cushion, and the air was still thick with that cloying smell of damp earth. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A dream? Had I fallen asleep at the wheel? But the road was straight. I hadn't drifted. I was wide awake, my adrenaline-soaked brain firing on all cylinders. He was there, and then he wasn't. It was as simple and as terrifying as that. I sat there for a long time, the rain beating down on the roof, my belief in a rational, controllable world dissolving into the storm outside. The drive home was a blur of paranoia. Every shadow on the roadside was him, Every flicker of a headlight in my rearview mirror was a phantom pursuit. When I finally stumbled into my apartment, I left every light on. Sleep was out of the question. The image of that buckled seatbelt over an empty seat was burned into my mind. In the days that followed, I tried to bury the memory, to rationalize it as a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. It was a story I told myself over and over, a mantra against the encroaching madness. But the world had started to feel thin, fragile. The cold spot in my car never left. Even on hot days, the passenger seat remained unnaturally cool to the touch. Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of that damp, earthy smell when I first got in. Then came the reflections. I'd be adjusting my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I'd see him in the back seat, his pale eyes meeting mine before he vanished. I started taking the bus to work. My best friend, Mark, was my designated skeptic. He was a civil engineer, a man who believed in blueprints and stress tolerances. When I finally broke down and told him everything, he listened with a patient clinical expression. "Leo, you're going through a lot," he said, his voice laced with the kind of condescending sympathy I'd come to dread. "The divorce, the pressure at work, the mind can play tricks on you. You were tired on a dark road. It was a hypnagogic jerk, a waking dream. The seatbelt was buckled, Mark. The door was locked. So you imagined it. You were half asleep and your brain filled in the blanks to make a scary story. You need to see someone. A therapist." His refusal to believe was like a wall. It didn't just dismiss my experience, it invalidated my sanity. I felt more isolated than ever, trapped on an island of terror that no one else could see. The world I knew was proceeding as normal, while mine had fractured. The obsession took hold. I couldn't work. I couldn't think. I needed answers. I became a frantic detective of my own collapsing reality. Using my car's GPS history, I pinpointed the exact stretch of road where I had picked him up. It was near a forgotten little town called Havenwood, a place the highway had bypassed decades ago. One Saturday, fueled by coffee and a gnawing dread, I drove back. Havenwood was a town slowly being reclaimed by nature. Rusted signs, faded storefronts, a single blinking traffic light over an empty intersection. The local library was a small brick building that smelled of dust and decaying paper. The librarian was a woman in her late 60s, Mrs. Gable, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than I was comfortable with. She was the town's keeper of stories, its unofficial historian. I started vaguely, asking about local legends or ghost stories connected to the highway. She was polite but dismissive until I described the old man. Her face paled, and the professional smile tightened. "You gave him a ride," she stated, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a question. My blood ran cold. "How did you know?" She beckoned me to a back room, away from the main library floor. It was filled with overflowing file cabinets and stacks of yellowed newspapers. "People around here know not to stop on that stretch of road after dark," she said, her voice low. "Especially not in a storm." She pulled out a heavy, leather-bound scrapbook filled with brittle newspaper clippings. She flipped through the pages with a practiced hand until she found what she was looking for. The headline, from a 1958 edition of the Havenwood Chronicle, read, "Vagrant killed in hit and run, body unclaimed." The photograph was grainy, but it was unmistakably him. The same gaunt face, the same hollow eyes. His name was Silas Blackwood. He wasn't from Havenwood. He was a drifter who had appeared one autumn and lingered, a silent, unsettling presence. The article said he was struck by a car during a torrential storm and left for dead. The driver was never found. "That's not the whole story," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes fixed on the photograph. "Silas wasn't just a drifter. He was a collector. He collected misery. People said he fed on it. When someone was grieving or desperate, he would just appear. He wouldn't say much, but after he left, they felt hollowed out, drained. The legend is that he died cold and alone on that road, and his spirit became anchored to it, forever seeking warmth from the living." She then handed me a small, tattered, leather-bound book. It was a diary. This belonged to a farmer, Thomas Miller. He gave Silas a ride about a year before he died. Miller was never the same afterwards. I spent the rest of the day in a dusty corner of the library, poring over the diary. Miller's neat cursive script slowly unraveled into a frantic, barely legible scrawl. October 12th. Picked up an old man on the road today. Poor soul was soaked to the bone. Said nothing. The chill in the truck is something fierce. October 19th. I keep seeing him. In the reflection of the window at night. Martha thinks I'm drinking again. The cattle are spooked. I feel a coldness in my own bones. November 5th. He is not a memory. He is a passenger. When I close my eyes, I feel him beside me. He is hungry for my warmth, for my sorrow over the failed crop. He takes it. He leaves only the cold. November 21st. The rules are becoming clear. An invitation cannot be rescinded. He takes what is offered. Loneliness is a feast for him. He is not a ghost that haunts a place. He haunts the person who opened the door. The final entry was a single, terrifying sentence. December 3rd. He is no longer in the passenger seat. He is inside. A week later, according to a subsequent newspaper clipping Mrs. Gable showed me, Thomas Miller had walked into his barn and hanged himself. The moment I read that, I felt a physical shock, as if a circuit had been completed. The dread wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a certainty. I had opened the door. I had invited him in. And now I understood with chilling clarity that there was no easy escape. My car wasn't haunted. I was. The revelation broke me. I was no longer fighting against a trick of the mind. I was fighting an entity with rules and a history. And the rules were all in its favor. The haunting escalated from subtle intrusions to outright psychological warfare. The reflection in the mirror no longer vanished when I looked away. It would linger for a second too long, a ghostly afterimage, sometimes with a faint, cruel smile on its lips. I'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, to find the side of the bed where Clara used to sleep feeling ice-cold and damp, the indentation of a head on the pillow next to mine. The dry, rattling cough was no longer faint. I would hear it right behind me in my empty apartment, a sound that made every muscle in my body seize up. I tried to fight back. I sold the car, practically giving it away to a used car lot. I felt a momentary surge of relief, a fool's hope that I had severed the connection. 2 days later, the dealership owner called me, furious. The teenager he'd sold it to had returned it, babbling about an old man who appeared in the passenger seat and whispered his name. The owner demanded I take the car back. "It's your problem," he'd snarled. The lesson was brutal. The object didn't matter. The invitation did. My friendship with Mark reached its breaking point. Seeing my deteriorating state, he agreed to stay the night, determined to prove it was all in my head. He camped out on my sofa, a book on his lap, a smug, rational expression on his face. Around 2 a.m., a scream ripped through the apartment. I ran into the living room to find Mark pressed against the far wall, his face ashen, pointing a trembling finger at the television. It was on, but the screen was a roiling sea of black and white static, and from the speakers, instead of white noise, came a low, rasping whisper, repeating the same phrase over and over. Further on, further on, further on. Mark grabbed his keys and jacket and was out the door in seconds. He didn't even look at me. "I'm sorry, Leo," he called from the hallway, his voice shaking. "I can't. Whatever this is, I want no part of it." The door slammed shut, and the sound of his footsteps faded, leaving me in a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than any noise. The last tether to my old reality was gone. I was completely, utterly alone, just as Silas wanted. My sanity began to fray like old rope. I stopped answering my phone, stopped going to work. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment. I covered all the mirrors with sheets. I sat in the dark, listening, waiting. I was a prisoner in my own life. The line between being awake and being in a nightmare blurred, then vanished entirely. Silas was a constant presence now, a shadow in my peripheral vision, A cold draft on a warm day, a whisper woven into the sound of the wind. He was draining me, feeding on my fear and despair, leaving me hollowed out, just like Thomas Miller. I knew if I didn't do something, I would end up just like him. The diary had said an invitation could not be rescinded. But what if it could be renegotiated? Desperation is a powerful catalyst. It strips away reason and leaves only raw instinct. I knew I couldn't run, I couldn't hide, and I couldn't fight it in my world. I had to go back to his. I had to face him on that road. Another storm was brewing, a mirror of that first night. The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind howled like a hungry animal. It was the perfect stage for the final act. I got into the car, my rolling prison, and started driving towards Havenwood. This time I wasn't running from the ghost. I was driving towards it. Every mile closer, the air in the car grew colder, the smell of damp earth more potent. By the time I reached the desolate stretch of highway, my breath was fogging in front of me. I pulled over at the exact spot where I had first seen him. I turned off the engine, plunging the car into darkness and a terrifying silence broken only by the storm. "I know you're here," I screamed into the empty car, my voice cracking with a mixture of terror and resolve. "What do you want from me? You want my life? Take it, but stop this torment." The temperature plummeted. A frost-like pattern spiderwebbed across the inside of the windshield. The passenger seat cushion began to depress, slowly, as if an invisible weight was settling into it. A figure began to coalesce out of the darkness, a shimmering, translucent form that was more suggestion than substance. It was him, Silas Blackwood, not as a reflection, but as a presence, his watery eyes fixed on me, filled with a cold, eternal hunger. The rasping voice echoed not in my ears, but directly inside my skull. Warmth. He didn't want my life, not my death. He wanted what he had lost. Companionship, however parasitic. He was doomed to travel that road forever, and he wanted someone to ride with him. He wanted to feed on my despair, not to kill me, but to sustain himself. In that moment of pure terror, a strange clarity came over me. I wasn't negotiating for my life. I was negotiating for my sanity. "You can't have all of it," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You can't have every day. It's not an endless feast." I made a pact with a ghost on a storm-swept highway. A terrible, desperate bargain. "One night," I said, the words tumbling out. "Every year, on this night, I will come back. I will drive this road with you. I will remember this feeling, this fear. You can have that. You can have the memory. But the rest of the year, you leave me alone." The figure of Silas shimmered. He tilted his head, considering my offer. For a terrifying minute, I thought he would refuse, that he would simply dissolve me into his cold emptiness. Then, the voice came again, a single, chilling word of agreement that sealed my fate. "Done." And just like that, he vanished. The cold receded. The air cleared. I was alone in my car, shaking uncontrollably, the sound of my own ragged breathing loud in the sudden stillness. I had survived, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was not free. I don't sell medical equipment anymore. I work from home, a quiet data entry job. I never drive at night if I can help it. My apartment is still filled with a quiet dread, and I still cover the mirrors. I have no friends. The story is too unbelievable to share, and the lie is too exhausting to maintain. I am a survivor, but the word feels hollow. To survive is to live, and what I do is merely exist, in a fragile truce with the abyss. I carry the scar of Silas Blackwood not on my skin, but on my soul. It's a permanent cold spot that no warmth can touch. I now understand that there are doors in this world that, once opened, can never be fully closed. You can only learn to live with what you've let inside. Once a year, on a cold, rainy autumn night, I get in my car. I drive the long hours back to that forgotten highway. And as darkness falls, I feel the temperature drop and smell the damp earth. I don't look at the passenger seat. I don't have to. I know he is there. And we drive together in silence, two lonely souls sharing a ride on a road to nowhere. He feeds on my memory of terror, and I pay the price for my survival, one horrifying night at a time. The real horror isn't that he vanished from my locked car. It's that, in a way, he never left at all. What about you? Have you ever felt a presence you couldn't explain, or seen something that shattered your reality? Share your stories in the comments below, and if this tale chilled you to the bone, please like and subscribe for more dives into the darkness that waits just beyond the veil.